Hi, this is Paul from Paul's Passing Thoughts. Welcome to New Calvinism 101, Part 1. And in this first part, I'm going to take you through the left side of our genealogy chart to show how that New Calvinism got into the Southern Baptist Convention. I want you to focus where the two arrows are. That is going to be our focus, what was going on in that box and that time frame right there. And so that's the focus of our attention, the John Zinn's box with the New Covenant theology, Ernest Reisinger's, and others less relevant. Okay, John H. Armstrong is a major figure in understanding and a very important connection to understanding this. And he wrote an article, as you can see here, about New Calvinism in regard to the write-up that was in Time magazine in 2009. And he makes some key statements there that will get us started. Well, a lot in the article, most of the article isn't relevant for us, but I'll focus on the red here. He said, I have watched this movement for Neo-Calvinism or New Calvinism from its infancy. I personally attended the first meeting and several more the years following of the group that started this effort back in the 1980s. I personally knew the founder who dreamed up the idea of recovering Calvinism in the SBC and then spread the doctrines of grace very widely. He is now with the Lord. I'll go ahead and tell you that's Ernest Reisinger. Next on the red, I was also involved in the various gospel recovery groups which were begun, now creating large gathering of folk who believe they are the people who are preaching and recovering the biblical gospel. Boy, don't forget that. That's the mentality of the movement. This is key. All right, they're recovering the biblical gospel. It's been lost. We're in an evangelical dark age, so on and so forth. So, actually, as we will see, there's no separation of two groups here, and John H. Armstrong was involved in the core of this movement really well before the 1980s. All right, this is an excerpt from The Truth About New Calvinism, obviously page 64. This is from an article that John Armstrong wrote about a Don Blosh who had passed away. I believe the article was called The Death of a Friend. Reading as follows, he said, one summer in the late 1970s, I believe I attended a small group gathering associated with the ministry of a popular magazine of the time called Present Truth magazine. The magazine actually opened my eyes to the need for recovering gospel truths in an age that was fast losing its grip on the grace of God. Two teachers were leading this small gathering, and there could not have been more than 75 people in the room. One of those in the audience and sharing insights only as a humble participant was Dr. Don Blosh. Hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I was impressed that a man of such profound scholarship would take the time to share in a small event where he was not a featured speaker. Don believed, take note, Don believed something important was going on in that room and wanted to interact with it. So did I. Let's continue with another article by John Armstrong that I cite in the book. First paragraph, he talks about, there on the left-hand side, the 16th century recovery of Paul's objective message of justification. Alright, take note of that. Paul's objective message of justification, rather. He says that's what Paul taught. And he said that that is what was recovered in the Reformation. That's what he's saying in the first two paragraphs. He says the powerful truth of righteousness by faith needs to be restated plainly and understood clearly by every generation. He goes on, in our time we are awash in a sea of subjectivism. That would be in the antithesis of Paul's supposed objective message of justification. As one magazine put it, he said, referring to our day as a sea of subjectivism, he says, let me explain. As one magazine put it over 20 years ago, in 1972, he said the publication was known as Present Truth. Now, Present Truth was the theological journal of the Australian Forum. Alright, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. That was founded by Robert Brinsmead, a Seventh-day Adventist. That was their magazine. Quoting the magazine, he talks goes on to say that it published the results of a survey with a 5-point questionnaire which dealt with the most basic issues between the medieval church and the Reformation. Polling showed 95% of the Jesus people were decidedly medieval and anti-Reformation in their doctrinal thinking about the gospel. Among church-going Protestantism, they found ratings nearly as high. Alright, skipping on down, he says, to the other side of the page, last paragraph of the quote, I do not believe that the importance of the doctrine of justification by faith, which is really, by the way, the objective message of justification that he mentioned before, can be overstated. We are once again in desperate need of recovery. Darkness has descended upon the evangelical world in North America and beyond, much as it had upon the established 16th century church. Alright, and I go on to say here in the book, according to Armstrong, we are once again in desperate need of recovery. Darkness has descended upon the evangelical world in North America and beyond, much as it had upon the established 16th century church. I go on to say, maybe with a little sarcasm, apparently light came 20 years prior to this writing of that post via the Forum's Present Truth magazine. That was the mindset of the Reformation movement in the early 80s that is now New Calvinism. So we'll deal with all this later, but just note that early on, in the early 70s, Armstrong is up to his ears in this doctrine and is completely bought in to this gospel recovery motif, the new Reformation, the present dark age, all of that hook, line, and sinker. Well, here's an image from the actual Present Truth magazine issue that he's talking about, and there's the questionnaire. You can read it here. Before you read the next section of the seminar presentation, you are invited to test yourself by answering 3 short questions. Look, this is the core of the Forum Doctrine. This is the core of Robert Mead's doctrine that launched the awakening movement in Seventh-day Adventism. And you can kind of read through there and look at the questions. I'm not going to address them right now, but we'll get into it a little bit deeper as we go on. You can pause here and kind of absorb those yourself, and then we'll come back and touch on it later. All right, this quote is in the book and from my interview with Robert Brinsmead. What do you think the unique theological findings of the Forum were in light of history? Robert Brinsmead: definitely the centrality and all-sufficiency of the objective gospel, understood as a historical rather than an experiential event, something wholly objective rather than subjective, an outside-of-me event, and the efficacy of an outside-of-me righteousness, which in New Calvinism is also extended to sanctification also, but more on that later. Let's take a peek back at the chart. What we just read by Brinsmead is what he claims was definitely a breakthrough with the Australian Forum. Basically, folks, this is the core of the doctrine that the Australian Forum thinks that they rediscovered. And that's also what John H. Armstrong has plainly said. And as we shall see a little bit later, it's also the core doctrine, if you back up a little bit to the right there. COG, it's called, Centrality of the Objective Gospel. That was really what launched the awakening movement that turned SDA totally upside down in the 60s. Alright, now we're going to look at how John Zenz fits into this. And we'll be getting a lot of information from this document here written by John Zenz. It's an informal essay, Law and Ministry in the Church. And it covers what really constitutes the Brinsmead era, 1972 to 1984. The Australian Forum was begun sometime in 1970. But again, for the most part, this constitutes the Brinsmead era. Very important document. On to the second part. Thank you for listening.